Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Pastors. I'm Derek White and this is
Stephen Taylor.
Well, how are you doing today, Stephen?
I'm shattered, to be honest. It has been a long day at work.
Yeah, now for me it is 3:40 p.m. and what time is it over there in Great Britain?
20 to 10.
20 to 10.
And I'm old, so 10 o'clock is bedtime.
Yes, well, I'm a night person, so midnight, 1 a.m. is bedtime. The older you get, the less sleep you need, so I got the Ancient of Days going on over here.
I think if I didn't have a tiny baby who woke up at 6, then yeah.
Ooh, yeah. That's right. How old's your daughter now?
16 and a half months now.
16 and a half months.
Yeah.
And then soon it'll be 16 and a half years old, and you're going to go, no, where did the time go?
I'll have a baseball bat for any lads who come round.
There you go. There you go. And then she'll just cry, Daddy, don't run the boys off. Oh, my goodness. Yes. Well, again, welcome to the Dungeon Pastors. And today we want to talk to you about accessibility. Accessibility in the church, accessibility at your gaming table, accessibility at gaming conventions. And with that in mind, I want to turn it over to my friend Stephen, and he's going to define accessibility and what we mean by that today.
So, accessibility, it's a word that gets bandied around a lot. It basically means making it that whatever you are doing, everybody, regardless of what their ability is, can actually participate and benefit from it. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to work, stupidly hard and stupidly long trying to cover every single possible aspect that somebody has. But we do need to do a base level of stuff that means the vast majority of people can get it. So you need to be thinking about people who are blind, people who are deaf, people who have autism, people who have learning difficulties, people who are wheelchair bound or paraplegics and things like that. What can you do to make whatever you're doing as accessible as possible to all of those people? And actually, if you're doing that, then you're making it accessible even to those who are able-bodied as well. They'll be able to find that they can do a lot more with it. They can learn more from it. They can benefit more from it. So that's accessibility in a 1-minute nutshell.
Now, the question I have for you is, why do we want to be accessible? Why don't we just want to keep it just for ourselves? To heck with it. If I don't have any friends or church people who have accessibility issues, why should I even worry about making it accessible for other people?
Do you not have any friends who have accessibility issues? That's the thing. People don't tell you. And just because they don't look disabled, just because they don't, and I don't really like the word disabled, but it's the one that works in this situation. Just because they don't look disabled doesn't mean that they aren't disabled. They could have low-level hearing loss. They might be colorblind. A lot of people who are struggling with issues will have found coping mechanisms. So then they appear to everybody else that they're fine, when actually they're really not, and they're struggling. And if they're struggling just to be able to listen, just to be able to follow along, are they going to actually be learning what it is that you're telling them? Or are they going to be spending all of their time trying to follow what you're saying and missing the point because they're too focused on, right, well, I need to listen really hard because I can't really hear him? Or what do these words say? I can't read them. Or, somebody's playing the red character that looks like brown, and that character looks brown. Is that green? I don't know. So yeah, you've got to bear these things in mind and help people out.
And I would say there's even one more important reason: be kind. I saw a tweet today about that Fred Rogers from the TV show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood said, and he gave 3 steps to making the world a better place. Be kind, be kind, be kind. And I think it's the kind thing to do. It's the nice thing to do. And that's one of the metaphors you and I were talking about, is the metaphor of an open table. And by an open table, in both of our traditions, if I'm remembering the Anglican Church right, I'm a United Methodist minister. Stephen is an Anglican. And in both of our traditions, we practice what is called open communion. It means we have an open table. Anyone and everyone is invited to participate. We leave it to their own matter of conscience on whether or not they wish to participate. So if they come from a tradition that doesn't allow them to share communion with us, we still invite them forward. We'll pray for them. We don't require everyone to take it. It's an open table. Come as you are. I don't like this expression all the time, but sometimes it works. It's God's buffet table, and everyone's welcome at the buffet table. And that's the way Stephen and I both approach our tabletop gaming as well. It's an open table, and we want to make everyone as welcome as possible. Now, one of the ways that we do that in the life of the church is one of the things we've talked about in many churches about making our tables more open is we don't use words that would keep people away from the table. We just ask, one of the invitations we give to our table is all who love the Lord Jesus Christ and earnestly seek to repent of their sin are welcome to the table. That's all we do. That's the invitation to the table. Now, some of the things practically we've done in the life of the church is very often many churches will offer gluten-free bread for those who may have celiac disease or gluten sensitivities. In many traditions, for those who may be battling alcoholism, we don't use alcohol in the wine. We'll just use grape juice or unfermented wine. I've actually had unfermented wine, and it tastes wonderful. It's different than grape juice, not as sweet. And so those are things that we do to make the table more accessible. Many places have widened their church aisles so that wheelchairs are easier to come down. And in some places where people aren't able to come due to a lack of vision, we've gone to them. We've left behind the chancel rail and we go out to them and we offer them communion at their seats in case they're not physically able to come forward. One of the most beautiful experiences I've ever experienced as a pastor was we had an older lady who wanted to come forward, but she could not walk and she could not kneel on her own. And 2 people, both of them older as well, one got under each arm, brought her forward to receive communion. Now, in my tradition, we place the bread in your hand. But she couldn't even hold her hands. I think she had Parkinson's. And so she could not even hold her hands where she could hold the bread. So they helped her kneel and she opened her mouth and I placed the bread on her tongue. That's the only time I've ever had that experience. But that was me allowing and trying to make this table as accessible to her. Now that's an open table in the religious sense of the word and in the Christian practice with specifically, Stephen has a ton of experience organizing game days. So what I would like Stephen to do is talk to us about what an open gaming table looks like at a game day. How do you make your game days more accessible and more open? I have more experience in a convention setting, but Stephen has more of that practical day-to-day, month-to-month gaming settings. So I want him to talk to us about how you can make your game days at your churches or in your communities, wherever they are, more accessible.
So yeah, accessible game days are really important. You need people to feel like they can come in and take part. Obviously, location is very important in it. If you've got people in wheelchairs, they're not going to be able to get into a place with stairs, for instance. Well, they might be able to, but it'd be a lot of a struggle. Now, sometimes you can't avoid that. Some places you have to use the hall that you've got, and you don't have the option. But if you do have the option, go somewhere that's got disabled access. That makes it so much easier for everybody in the community to get in. And it's actually easier for those who are playing the games as well, and for you bringing the games in, because you no longer have to load massive games upstairs.
That's an excellent point.
So you could always just claim that you're lazy, and that's why you want to do it. Then there's the game choices that you make, and this is a little bit harder because the colours in games you don't have any control over. But there are some out there designed with colourblindness in mind. So if you go for the colourblind options, you'll usually have very different colours of pieces for that. So that will help people who have colourblindness. They'll be able to see what their piece is and make it clearly distinct from others. There was one that came out recently, and I'm trying desperately to find what it is. Where are we? Scythe, that was the one I was looking for, is renowned for being really good for people who are colourblind, because each of the pieces are coloured, but they also look fundamentally different from each other's. So the mechs that you've got are different shapes depending on which colour you are. So red mechs will never look the same as yellow mechs, will never look the same as green mechs. So that works really well. I should have remembered that because it's right behind me, the kiddie version of it. There. So getting things like that. Going for, Derek's just linked Meeple Like Us Board Games Colourblindness, which is actually what I was looking at my phone for just then as well. I'll put that link into our YouTube
That's
thing.
okay. Just remember, whenever you're talking, I'm going to be Googling a resource and vice versa. So that way we can help each other, and we don't have what happened last week where we have a section of dead air for you folks. So, but we're always going to be really open about that. One of the things we want to do in this podcast is make it real. And so while you're not watching it live, we're going to be trying to work on resources live. And so I'll let Stephen continue about the color blindness, as I so rudely interrupted.
Yeah, so you've got your color blindness. You need the different colors for it, the different shapes, ideally, so people can see, oh, that's clearly my piece. Now, this is anecdotal, and I don't like that it's anecdotal because it's people making a judgment call that they shouldn't really be making. But there's a rough percentage of 1 in 3 people attending a board game event will possibly be on the autistic spectrum, or will show, the sorts of signs that educators might spot when you're teaching and you go, oh, I think that child might have autism, that you would then send them to the SEN team to see what they can do. SEN is special educational needs.
Right.
And they're the people who will do the tests to find out if they need any additional support. So the 1 in 3 people who attend game days in Christian churches, and this is based on a survey of 100 different church board game events across the UK, that 1 in 3 people may be on the autistic spectrum. Most people will actually outright tell you if they're on it, especially if they're gamers, because they're proud about it usually.
Well, and we're going to talk about autism a little bit more further down, but that's something I have personal experience with. Our son is autistic. He's high functioning, and there are certain things that autistic people have in common. And learning rules and getting to know rules and wanting that structure that you find in a game is very important for them. They want that structure. They want that. They desire the ability to be able to know what's going on. Rules for an autistic person can often give them a structure they don't feel like they have. So that's one of the things, as a parent of an autistic child, I found out. So one of the things that I would recommend, I'm moving my camera around here a little bit, I'm getting some glare, but one of the things I found out that helps people helps make the game more accessible is the ability to clearly spell out the rules. So if you're going to run a game day, you need to make sure you know that game fairly well. if you're going to run a game, you need to make sure you know it fairly well, especially if you're running it and there are people that are on the autism spectrum. They want you to know the rules. They want the rules to be clear. And I'll mention some more of that further when I talk about some of the events I've been to with my son. One of the things that stirred this podcast is not this particular episode, is some of the things I've dealt with and Stephen's dealt with on a very personal level. Now, as Stephen was talking about accessibility and accessibility at game days, and making games more accessible, one of the things I've wondered about, Stephen, is do you know of any particular games that are accessible for people who are blind? Because that's one of the things I've wondered about. You know, if someone, I don't mean someone who's just who might need large print or something like that, but I mean someone who can't see at all. Are there any games or gaming companies that you know? Because I was trying to think of stuff before the podcast and I could not think of anything. So if you're out there listening and you know resources and you see this video, please, in the comments section of the video, a link to resources for other people if you know of games. But do you know of any, Stephen?
Well, Uno has recently released a Braille version of the game. So you can actually check the numbers in Braille, which is good. There's most role-playing games would be playable by people who are fully blind. You're using your mind to imagine it. I know many people like using miniatures and maps and things like that, but that's just accessories. It's not needed for the game. So you can actually still play that way. Board games are a little bit more complicated. For somebody who's fully blind, I suppose you'd need to have somebody playing with you. You'd have to be on the team with them and explaining constantly what things are there and what moves are available. So it's doable, but it wouldn't be doable on their own quite with the games that I know of. There will be games out there that are designed specifically for people who are blind. I just don't know of any of them at the moment.
Yeah. So again, if you know of any of those, if you're watching this video, whatever media you're watching it on, leave a comment down there and let us know about resources that are available, because that's something I've been curious about. Let's see, what are we? Oh, yes. Our next thing we want to talk about is, so Stephen, have you ever had any awkward accessibility moments at a gaming event or at a church?
There's a couple I could think of. One is funny, one of them is not funny. So I'll start with the not funny one and then move on to the funny one that way around. So my mum is in a wheelchair. She fell up the stairs when I was about 10, slipped a disc in the back, partially severed the spinal nerve, and has been in a wheelchair in a lot of pain since. So once she got enough confidence to go back into church, we just had some new doors fitted to the front of the church. And under the UK law at the time, they had to be openable by somebody in a wheelchair. And they were just that little bit too heavy for my mum to do. So she went to the PCC with it. Now, at the time, my parents were on the PCC, the parish church council, the council of elders, the people who decide what happens with the church.
Yeah, those people in control.
At the time, my parents were part of that, and they were against something that the person who thought he was in charge of the church was keenly for. So
that never happens in a church, Stephen. Never.
No, not
one person wanting all the power and control? What are you talking about?
In the church, who would have thought it? So, to those who are non-Christians who are being quite blasé about this,
I'm being outright sarcastic.
Unfortunately, it happens a little bit too much for anybody's liking.
A little bit too much. Okay.
Yeah. So he got his cronies together for it, and when Mum raised this in the PCC meeting, they turned around to her and told her that she was a cripple, and therefore God hated her. She'd done something to offend him, and she wasn't welcome in the church, and she could come in through the side door rather than the front.
Oh, my Lord Jesus. I'm going to cross myself on that one. I'm crossing myself because I wish I had a baseball bat right now to cripple them.
Yeah.
In the love of Jesus, I'm telling you, in the love of Jesus, I'll take their kneecaps out. All right. So what happened?
Well, we left the church, to be honest. That was the only real thing you can do in that situation. And for a long time, it took me, I don't know, 7 years to go back to a church again. So,
don't blame you. Don't blame me at all.
You know, so as I say, accessibility, that's the bad side of accessibility. That is how you do not do accessibility there. On the funnier side, and this is why I've kept this one for now, went to another church following my grand's funeral when her ashes were going to be interred. And it was very high Anglican church. Now, high Anglican churches often pride themselves as being more Catholic than Catholics. So they do a lot of Latin singing, and in some churches they still chant the gospel. So as they're speaking it through, they're chanting in that tone that lets it carry across the building. For when they didn't have microphones, they chant, and it would spread, and you could hear it. So it had a point. That's why it was there, but it has now just become tradition because it's not needed anymore. So, first of all, to anybody who's hard of hearing, it's starting to blend into things because it's quite monotonous, as is the way that they chant it. And it was when Peter spots Jesus on the beach after Jesus has come back and realizes who he is. So it's the forgiveness of Peter's story. But as Peter sees Jesus, the Bible's a little bit more descriptive than it needs to be at this point. And the guy chanting went, "And Peter saw Jesus, and he jumped out of the boat to swim to him, and he was naked."
He was naked. Oh my goodness! Yeah.
So, yeah.
I could see in America if somebody was dozing off, that would wake them up really quick in church. He was naked. Well, I'm in the South. It's not naked. It's naked down here. Naked. He was naked. Oh my Lord Jesus. That's funny. That's funny. Oh man. So I've been trying to think of some funny ones because you wanted me to have some funny ones. So I'll start off with the negative ones like you did and try and share some funny accessibility stories too. But the most negative one I had was actually this summer, and I wrote an article about it. It's in an issue of Knights at a Dinner Table comic, and basically we went to a gaming convention, one of the largest in the U.S. It was not Gen Con, but you could probably guess which one it was. And we went there with my family, and one of the reasons we went was they were supposed to have a quiet room for people with autism. And our son is autistic. And pretty much when we got there, they had it open to everybody on the first day. And then the group that sponsored the quiet room had it closed the rest of the convention. And you had to, well, they didn't have it closed. They had it booked for special events for that specific group. And I was very frustrated. I was very angry about that because it was not publicized. That part was not publicized on their website. And you had to drill down in to find out about it. I tweeted about it, and they're like, well, it's right here. And I'm like, no, that's not easy to find. And so it was very tough on our son, who was in tears and was feeling excluded. He was overwhelmed by all the sights and the sounds of the convention center. Plus, they were having the Gay Pride Parade in that area at the same day. And that the sights and the sounds of that were overwhelming for him. It was just a lot of noise. And so one of the reasons we went was because as a pastor, who games. I wanted to take my family someplace gaming. But when we saw that there was a place set aside for our son, that said, yes, we want to go. I mean, that's one of the reasons why if I bring my family to GaryCon, I do my best to stay as close on site as possible. Simply because if I'm going to a gaming convention, I want the hotel room to be very close by in case my son's overwhelmed. So I'm taking that into consideration. And so it was very frustrating when you've offered something, but it's not available when it's needed. And this is a thing I've had to come to grips with as a father of a child who has autism and being around others with disabilities. I have to understand that when you don't know when your problem is going to arise. You don't know when you're going to need this access. You don't know when you're going to be overstimulated and need to be in a place where that is. You don't know when these things are going to occur. And the fixes, for the most part, aren't difficult. Now, I will tell you some of the funny parts I've dealt with accessibility. One is in the church setting, and we have some stairs in our church, have a lot of stairs, and so we don't have the greatest access, and that's something I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Well, actually, I'll talk about that after I finish this, but we don't have the greatest access, and so I have knee issues, and I have to take the steps one step at a time. Well, I also keep a lot of keys in my pocket because I have keys to the doors of the church, keys to the house, all this stuff. And so I'm going up the stairs at the church, taking them one step at a time so my knees don't kill me. And you can hear all my keys rattling. Ching, 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 ching. I'm not even halfway up the stairs, and I hear people in the office I'm going up to going, who's that making all that noise? And I hear my administrative assistant go, oh, that's the pastor. And I had not even been here that long, but they could tell it was me because I make that much noise coming up the stairs one step at a time.
Oh, you're doing Jensen's pastors, I see.
Yes, we have a visitor. This is my son, Arthur. Say hey, Arthur.
Hey.
Hey. All right, well, let us finish up, okay, buddy?
Yeah, I just came here from school.
You just got home from school. That's true. Can I get a kiss?
No,
not on camera?
No,
Can I get a hug on camera?
And seriously, one time, I'm not going to swear on pod.
Okay, all right.
So, what were you talking about anyway?
What was I talking about? Well,
just closing the door. So.
Just closing the door. Well,
so about Mom.
Well, those of you who are listening, you're going to see some interruptions. This is actually one of the people we've been talking about. This is my son, Arthur.
No, Arthur.
Arthur White. This is my son, Arthur White. And Arthur is one of the reasons we work toward accessibility. So his timing's perfect. We work toward accessibility so that he has places to play games and things of that nature.
And also, speaking of games, I do know this is called the Dungeons and Masters.
That's right.
I know a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and I do play it.
And yes, he does play Dungeons and Dragons. He also plays board games.
And video games.
Anything else you want to say, Arthur?
Well, not really.
Not really much. Okay. All right. Great. So one of the things we do for accessibility is that. So that was the funny experience I had going up and down the steps of the church and them knowing that. But one of the things I do as a pastor is at churches, when I get to a new congregation, I'm supposed to do an accessibility audit. That means I'm supposed to go around the church and find ways that it may or may not be accessible, whether the bathrooms have handicap stalls, whether there are handicap entrances and things of that nature. Now, in doing these accessibility audits, very often I find that churches aren't that accessible. And the problem is that we face in our churches and at many gaming conventions is the cost is prohibitive. I mean, the church I'm at would love to be more handicap accessible. To do that, we need to repave 2 entire areas. One, we need to put in a new parking lot in one area. We need to pave it properly. We need to put in a ramp in another area. We need to repave another area. That you're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 US, if not more. And so trying to make things accessible is not always inexpensive, but it's worth it. But the question is where do you find the money? Where do you get the money? It doesn't grow on trees. And so one of the things I want to encourage you, if you're hosting a game day at your church, do an accessibility audit beforehand. If you're hosting your game day at a restaurant, we've done that. I've had game days in a section of a restaurant. Do an accessibility audit. You can Google that online, how to do an accessibility audit, and do this so that people with physical disabilities have easier access. It is necessary. And as gamers such as myself begin to age, I find that I have accessibility issues of my own. When I was at that same gaming convention this summer, I brought what I like to call my wizard staff. It's a good walking stick. It's really nice and sturdy. It looks like a wizard staff. And I was walking through the game hall and I was using it. And the best part was, if people started shoving me too much, they saw that staff and they kind of moved out of the way. And what was funny is one person came up to me and said, well, you don't have a wizard outfit on to go with that. And I said, well, it's a walking stick. And then another person closer to my own age came up to me and he said, he had heard the previous conversation. He said, oh man, I wish I'd have brought my walking stick. So after you hit a certain age, you go to a gaming convention, people realize this isn't a wizard staff, this is a walking stick. And these are issues we need to face in the gaming community as well as the church community. How do we make access for more people? In the gaming community, if we want more people in our hobby, we have to find ways to make it accessible for them. In the church, Stephen's story is a prime example of how not being accessible, not being welcoming, not being opening, keep people out of the church. I mean, that's BS, man, to talk to someone in that manner, to make them think because they have a disability or they have some crippling illness that God hates them. And sadly, that theology is still alive and well today in many circles. And we can't be doing that. All right, I'm going to get off my pulpit there. So we've talked a little bit about how to make spaces accessible. But what are some other ways you could think of, Stephen, that would make spaces more accessible to people?
So if we're trying to make spaces more accessible, at the moment, as part of my job, I've been tasked with trying to explain to people how to make resources and things like that accessible. So when you've got things that people need to read, when you've got things that people need to work with, how do you make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible? And a large amount of that is sorry, his son's making me laugh.
I know.
A large amount of that is by just thinking through, am I using language that is going to stop people from understanding? Am I using big words for the sake of using big words? Can you break that down further?
That's you using... Point.
Sorry, say again?
I said that was an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Yeah, so often too much of our language, especially in church circles, is othering.
Yeah. If you're using images on the screen, are you describing what those images look like? If you're using them in a publication that's going out digitally, have you bothered to enter the alt text into it in case somebody's using a screen reader? These are things that people don't necessarily think about. If you're doing videos, are you putting it somewhere that will close caption it automatically, like YouTube, for instance? And if you're not doing that, how are you making it accessible? How are you making it that people can see it? Because to somebody who's deaf, all they'll be seeing right now is this.
And you're hearing dead air there. And Stephen, for those of you listening to the podcast, Stephen was making silent motions with his mouth. And that's something we're working on the podcast, is we're trying to get it transcribed so that it'll be written for people, and we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. And it takes intentionality. It takes a desire to want others to have access to what you're doing. And I think that is the number one driving force. And to be honest, I think I've become much more of an advocate about it, like many people advocate for things when it hit close to home. And so we're doing a video like this for those of you who may think you don't know someone with autism, may think you don't know anyone who's disabled. Chances are you do, as Stephen mentioned earlier. But what we want you to do is before it hits too close to home, we want you to already have that welcoming attitude. We already want you to be intentional about it, to see how we can make spaces more accessible. And with that in mind, we're going to have in our show notes and in our links, we're going to link you to some resources. One of the ones that I really like is Game to Grow. They're putting out a role-playing game for people with autism and how to work with people with autism to work on social skills. That it's called Critical Core. That's something I'm personally trying to work with here in the state of Tennessee in the United States. We've been taking to our son to an autism support group where they have a board game day once a month. And so we've said we're going to go to this. I had a great time our last game day. I posted some pictures about it. I got to run the Dungeon board game, one of the earliest board games among the creators and co-creators and all the people in the early days of D&D. It was called Dungeon. It's by Dave Migary, and I've met Dave at GaryCon. I've seen the prototypes of the original game. And so at this game day, I got to run Dungeon for a number of autistic people. One of them was my son. All the rest were older teenagers or young adults. And the great thing about that, Stephen, that I saw, which blew my mind, I've had kids sit at a table with 20-somethings and 30-somethings, and those kids have been treated horribly. At this game day, my son was treated just like another gamer.
Yep. And that's the important way of how you make something accessible to people who do have autism or learning difficulties, is you have patience. That's all it needs.
What?
Shocking.
Isn't that a virtue or something? Something Christians used to talk about?
Yeah, you'd think so. But it's if you're patient, you can let a lot of things slide by that would usually wind you up. And you've just got to take the time. And yes, somebody might be spending 5 minutes with analysis paralysis, but there might be a reason for that. They may be having a poor mental health day. They could have a learning difficulty that they've hidden very well from you. It could be that they can't see the colours properly, that they can't read the card properly. And you've just got to give them the time to do it, because they will enjoy it no matter what. I have one guy who comes to my game nights every single month. And he came to the very first one that I hosted. And he's in a wheelchair and he's got severe, all sorts of issues, unfortunately, bless him. He's in his late 40s, I think. That might be making him younger than he is. But yeah, he's in his late 40s. And when he came to that game day, it was the first time he had been out of his house on his own without his mum for 5 years.
Oh, my Lord.
Because he knew a church would be a safe place for it. Wow. And he came along this past week to the board game day that we did, even though he's had a rubbish week and he's really not well. He wanted to come along because it helps him deal with the issues he has in his life. And he played games with us, and everybody at our game night now knows him and will go out of their way to play that little bit slower to give him the chance. And we'll often say, when he goes to do something, say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And he'll insist, and he'll do it. But at least you're saying, "Are you sure that's what you want to do? Do you not want to do this instead?" And sometimes he'll go, "Oh yeah, Other times he'll go, nope, I want to do that. And then a couple of turns later go, why am I losing?
See, in my tradition, Stephen, and I'm pretty sure in yours as well, my Christian tradition is we would say that's a means of grace. That is a means of grace, that God is just the ability to welcome and accept others and bring a little bit of joy into their lives. And I think ultimately this is why we do this, is why we want there to be accessibility for people of all. We didn't even get into LGBTQ accessibility, which we both support. We want LGBTQ folks to feel welcome at game days in churches. We want minorities to feel welcome at game days anywhere we host them. We want everyone to feel welcomed, loved, and accepted. This is our goal. This now for us. Now, I know many people out there in the secular communities that support this inclusiveness and this accessibility for everyone. They do it for whatever reasons they have. We do this because we believe this is how we express the love of Jesus out into the world. And this is why we do this, because Jesus welcomed everyone at his table. And we want to welcome everybody at our tables, our open gaming tables. We want everyone to feel welcome. And that's why, we have rules about peace and harmony. We don't allow people to talk about politics. No Brexit talk at your tables now. Just like we don't talk about, politics at our tables. We don't want to talk about the American presidency or the political parties at our tables or what's going on right now. And to be very frank, I think we need that safe place in our culture. Safe places and safe spaces get a bad rep, but we need some place we can go and unplug from all the junk going on in our countries, our various countries' political discourse. Instead of worrying about the political discourses of our countries, let's go worry about the political discourses of fictional countries where we can actually try and do something about it. Or if you're playing nuclear war, just blow it all up and everything's better.
And it's really important as well, on that note, that some people will be listening to this now and just going, oh, they're just SJWs, the snowflakes, that's what they're doing. No, that's not what we're doing with this. Accessibility is about making it that everybody is able to access things at the same level. That's all that we're going for, the same base level of access. People will still be able to do better than other people. We're not saying you should always give up the game so other people can win. We're not saying that at all. We're saying put everybody on a level playing field. And that means some people might need a little bit more help than others. Some people won't need any help. Some people might need a bit of help, and some people might need a lot of help. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's interesting you bring this up, Stephen, because you made me think of something when you said this. If we viewed this in terms of sports, and pardon the expression, but if you play golf and you're playing golf with someone who's better than you, they take a handicap. Just like when I am a horrible basketball player, okay? I am horrible at playing basketball. I was horrible at it in high school, and nowadays I doubt I could even probably make it into a basket. But when I would play with other guys in high school, because I was so horrible, they would spot me 12 points to make the game more even. I still lost, but they spotted me points to make the game more even. So if we want to make gaming more fun, I mean, for me, I know there's some gamers out there that just want to totally trash you and they want to destroy you. They don't want you to score. They don't want you to do well at all. And that's how they get their kicks. That's not the people we're talking to. We're not talking to people. We're talking to people who want to have fun with other gamers. And so if you want the game to be fun for yourself and you're really good at it, and you crush all your opponents, see your enemies driven before you, and you hear the lamentations of their women, that's great. But if you really want to enjoy it, take a handicap in the game. And sometimes that handicap is just being more patient. Sometimes that handicap is giving people more time to play, more time to access things, more time to process. I mean, I used to love to play Magic the Gathering. Many of you probably don't know that because I hardly ever mention Magic. One of the reasons I stopped playing Magic the Gathering is because for me, it takes me longer to process my strategies. It takes me longer to cycle through a deck. And if you've ever played Magic with some really hardcore Magic players, it's bam, bam, bam. The cards are going down. You have to think like this on your toes, and they will get angry with you if you don't play as quickly as they do. And I just got tired of that. I said, I don't want to deal with this. I'm frustrated with that. It was not allowing me to learn better strategies or to grow in the game. Not to mention the cost was getting up there pretty good as well. But that's the thing, is we want everybody to feel welcome. We want everybody to enjoy the game. And one of the joys I get is when, and maybe it's just me being a dad or whatever, but one of the joys I get is when my son gets really good at a game and he's able to beat me at it. I mean, I enjoy that because that means I've taught him something. That means he's picked up on strategies. So making things more accessible to people can make it more enjoyable for you because, as a Christian and as a human being, I believe there is beauty and glory in diversity. There's a couple of other resources. I know one that Stephen mentioned, which we've also used here in America, which I really love, and that's Messy Church. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about Messy Church, Stephen?
Yeah, so Messy Church is I was going to say new initiative then. It's not new at all. It's been around for at least a decade. But it's church with a twist. So you'll have your message, and then you'll go and do games and crafts and activities and fun things around it. Rather than just sitting in the church and doing nothing and just listening, you're actively involved in what you're doing. It is church that is messy. And it doesn't have to take part in the church either. It can be in the school hall. It could be in the local village hall. It could be out in a park. And Messy Church is brilliant. It's been recognised now as a church by many, many denominations, particularly the Church of England, and there have been messy baptisms, there's been messy weddings, there's been messy confirmations. So that's the thing in the Church of England where you get baptized as an infant. So in order to take God on for yourself and to commit yourself to God, you have a confirmation when you're at least around about 11, usually, after which you've made that commitment that you are confirming what was said during your baptism. And the bishop comes and blesses you, and you take on your lifelong commitments to it.
Okay, quick theological question. So when you do confirmation, the bishop has to come?
Yep.
Yes, okay. See, in the United Methodist Church, we do the same thing. We baptize infants. We have confirmations as well, but the pastor of that congregation is able to do it. So that's an interesting difference.
Yeah, so baptisms are done by the pastor, the minister. We have so many different words for whoever's in charge. Could be rector, could be vicar, could be minister. Pastor works well. That's why we're called the dungeon pastors. For the baptism, it's fine. They do that. It's one of the main sacraments. Confirmation is something that the bishop does, and will go around different churches and do a confirmation for all the churches in that area who'll come, and their kids will all get confirmed there. And they'll have had classes beforehand learning about what Christianity is, so they know what they're taking on. And there are some churches as well that won't do confirmations because they don't believe in infant baptism. So they just have baptism. And Christianity, it's a broad church. Sorry, it's a bad joke.
Well, I know what broad church is. So some of your American listeners may not know what broad church is. David Tennant, Doctor Who. Yes.
So Messy Church is really good for that. It does tend to trend towards kid-friendly. Now, it shouldn't, because it is designed as all age, but just due to the nature of the activities that you're doing, a lot of the time it trends towards that way. So there is another resource that I've come across from a big charity called Scripture Union, who I do a lot of work with, which is called Explore Together. And in that one, it takes your church service and it gets rid of the sermon. and changes it into something completely different. So instead of having somebody talk at you for 10, 20, 50, in the case of Paul, 24 hours, well, there's read through the book of Acts. Paul preached for 24 hours at a place to a point that somebody fell out of a window and pretty much broke his neck. And Paul went down, blessed him, healed him, and said, come back in. And he carried on preaching. So, it can go on for a long time. But this Explore Together, instead of having your sermon, you go off to one of 6 areas, depending on how you learn best. There's a quiet zone for quiet reflection. There's a writing zone for you to go and read through things and write down notes as you wish. There's a listening zone for you to go and listen to hymns, to older sermons that have been recorded, or to somebody who is talking to you. There's a debate zone for you to talk about it. A messy zone where you're going to be doing some form of craft, maybe Play-Doh or Lego or something like that. And then a drawing zone for you to draw things. And as a teacher, I love this idea because people learn in so many different ways. And we don't all learn by somebody talking at us. A lot of us need something visual. A lot of us need what's called kinesthetic, which is actually moving and doing stuff and actually being physically involved with it. And I think a lot of us board gamers are in that last category, the kinesthetic. We like the pieces, we like moving them.
My wife, they use the term manipulatives in education over here. And so, yes, you need manipulatives, things like that. And I have found when I'm able to, in preaching, if you can use visuals, that helps a whole lot. And we won't even get into the power of symbols. The symbols in the glass in our church, stained glass windows, all of these things were meant to convey stories through the use of symbols and things around there. And it really made me think that's an accessibility issue too. In a time when the church did not always have people who were literate, when not everyone in the culture was literate, you used stained glass windows to tell the stories. So that was a part of the accessibility of the church. They used statues to tell stories. They used pictures in the church. They used artwork, or what is it, a bas relief? Is that the right word, a bas relief, where you have images carved into stone, things like that. Stone carvings, things like that were used to tell stories and convey a message. And that was an accessibility issue for people in a culture that were not always literate. So there's a number of important ways to do that. I think that's really powerful, Stephen. Thank you. And we're also going to put some more links in the show notes for these that you're interested in: Messy Church, Explore Together, Game to Grow. We're also going to link to the Badhana group. I think many of you will find them fascinating. We'll probably link to Autism Tennessee because I've specifically mentioned them, but also you can Google for autism support in your local areas as well. Be very careful though. I have dealt with a number of places that, be careful in looking for autism resources, because some of them will offer to cure people of autism, and I have serious issues with that. I get very angry about that. Autism is not something you can cure, and I think for me and our family, that's not something we would want to cure. We love who our son is. We love him the way he is, and that's who he is, and that's a part of his personality. Stephen also sent me a message, Included by Grace.
So if you follow @Included by Grace on Twitter, that's a person from our diocese called Lynn McCann, who does loads of stuff about inclusion in churches and making churches as accessible as possible. So there's a little bit of a difference between accessibility and inclusion. Inclusion is specifically for people with disabilities. Accessibility is making it better for everybody.
Right.
But it's just that terminology if people get confused over it. Also, I want to apologise. I'm in my conservatory and it has started raining, so if you can hear that in the background, that's what that is. And I will try and edit it out. but that might be beyond my capabilities.
That's all right. Well, I don't know how it's going to pick up on the audio or the video, but it sounds good to me. Well, I think we've covered as much as we could on this episode. Is there anything else we need to did we get it all?
No, I don't think that we've got anything else to cover on this one at the moment. Obviously, if anybody has particular accessibility needs or stories about accessibility or ideas that they've had, please do share them in the comments to us, either on the Facebook page, the Twitter page. We've got the YouTube comments that you can put it in, or even on iTunes comments. Just put it out there, see what you can tell us, and we're always very happy to know about new resources, and we'll probably give them a shout out at the start of the next one if anybody does.
Yes, if you give us any resources, we'll definitely take some of the best of those, give them a shout out. We're also going to put links to, in our show notes, links to the Dungeon Pastors on Twitter, as well as I know I'm going to have Stephen put up my personal Twitter account and all these other places to connect with us, because our goal is to get this out there to as many people as possible. Right now, we're both in a position where we can do this free of charge, so we're okay now. Maybe down the road we may ask for help, but right now we're able to get these resources out there. So whenever you could share a resource with us, you're not just sharing it with me and Stephen. You're not just sharing it with the Dungeon Pastors. You're sharing it with all our connections across social media. I want to give a shout out to our friends at Inroads Ministries today, our friends at Saving the Game, and our friends at the MinMax podcast. They have all contributed to helping us get this message out here. They've all encouraged us, and we appreciate them very much, and we love you all. And may the God of peace be with each and every one of you, pouring joy into your heart, and may all your hits be crits. Bye.
Bye.